creator of the Absolutely Understand Guitar video home study program. Check us out on the web at www.absolutelyunderstandguitar.com. One of the big things that you're going to find is that music is very much like a language. Ever heard anything like that before? I mean, we mean that absolutely literally, and as we go through our program, we come up with countless analogies between the way that, say, the English language works and the way music works, too. Now, what that means is that kind of makes the instruments we play something like typewriters. They're really just the machines on which we execute the language. But it's interesting to note that with any language, most of what goes on goes up in your mind. You have to understand how the language works, and that's what we're going to try to get you to understand. Now, before you can really understand any language, you have to understand how its alphabet works. And you know, for example, that the English alphabet has 26 units in it, and we select units out of that alphabet and form them into different patterns. We call those patterns overall, we call them words. There's all different types of words. There's nouns and verbs and adjectives and all. Exactly the same thing's going on in music. You've got your basic alphabet, you select you select units out of that alphabet and you form them into different patterns, but we don't call them nouns and verbs and adjectives. We call them things like chords and scales and melodies and harmonies. And but it's really exactly the same. And before you can understand the language, you have to understand the alphabet. And the first thing you have to know about that alphabet is how many basic units it has in it. And there's a lot of misconceptions about that and a lot of misinformation, but we're going to try to get you to see the real thing. And so, how many units are there in the musical alphabet? And before you answer, the good news is it's a lot less than 26. It's a much simpler alphabet than the English language alphabet. But there is one important difference. As you know, in the English alphabet, when you get to the end, when you get to Z, you're done. However, in the musical alphabet, as you probably know, when you get to the end of it, it starts over again, and then it starts over again. So my question is, how many basic units are there in the musical alphabet before they begin to repeat? Now, before I tell you the actual correct answer, let me tell you the most common wrong answers. By far, the most common wrong answer is 8. And I go, wrong. And people go, wrong? What do you mean? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. 8. Didn't Julie Andrews try to teach us that all the music's made out of those notes right there? Well, there's an element of truth to that, but there's some problems with that too. For example, we started with do, we ended with do. We repeated one of the notes, so 8 can't be the correct answer, which brings us to the second most common wrong answer. People go, well, okay, 7 then. And I go, still wrong. And they go, wrong? What do you mean? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. No one's heard of an H or an I or a J. The musical alphabet seems to end at G. That's 7. What's wrong with that? I go, those are just the white keys on a piano. What about the black keys? And people go, well, those are those sharp and flat things. And I go, yeah. And they go, well, I get the impression that the sharps and flats are like different than the other notes. And I go, well, I know why you think that, because that's kind of the dumb way they try to teach music a lot of the time. But nothing could be further from the truth. The black keys are exactly like the white keys. What you'll notice is, yeah, you got your 7 white keys, A through G. But how many black keys are there on a piano before they begin to repeat? Well, as you probably can see, there's a group of 3, and then there's a group of 2, and then they begin to repeat. So what is the actual answer? How many units are there in the musical alphabet before they begin to repeat? 7 white keys, 5 black keys. The answer is 12. There are 12 notes in the musical alphabet, and people will go on sometimes for decades and not understand that about the language of music. Now let's actually go and check out how these 12 notes actually fall and what they're called. So look at this graphic right here. I realize it's probably going to be a little bit fuzzy, but I think you'll be able to see it clear enough to get the general idea. Up at the top here, here's a piano keyboard. Now, you've got your familiar white keys, of course, going across, but then you've also got these black keys, and these are your sharp and flat notes, of course. Notice how they're arrayed. You have a group of 2, and then you have a group of 3, and then a space, and then a group of 2, and then another space, and a group of 3. And they begin to repeat after you see one set of those, group of 2, group of 3, and then it begins to repeat again. Now, you've also got your white keys, of course, and let's start right here. This is the white key that is just to the right of center in the group of 3 black keys. That's A. That's where your musical alphabet begins right there. Notice here's your next A up here. Same thing again. It's up in the next set of 3 just to the right of center. That distance, of course, is called an octave, as we can see down here. Many of you know that already. Here's A. You jump up to the 13th note there, and that's A again, and that distance is called an octave. But let's take a look at what's going on here. Here's A. Now, what's the name of the very next note higher than A? Notice there's a black key. that comes up next. This is one of these sharp and flat notes. Because it's a little bit higher than A, we often refer to it as A sharp. Remember, sharp simply means higher in pitch. Sometimes people think these words have big cosmic meanings, but they don't really. They just refer to pitch. They're very old words. I don't believe they're even English words, although certainly we have the words sharp and flat in the English language, but they mean different things to us. You can't equate what you know about the words sharp and flat in the English language with how they mean in the musical language. Sharp, which has a symbol like a pound sign, simply means higher in pitch. Flat, which has a symbol like a lowercase b, simply means lower in pitch. So here we are at A. The black key just above that, sometimes it's more convenient to think of it as the next note higher than A, so we call it A sharp. But you'll come to find out that in an equal number of contexts, it's more convenient to think of it as the next note lower than B, so we call it B flat. A sharp and B flat are two different names for exactly the same note. Now, historically, it wasn't always true, and you'll come to find later on that there are exceptions to that. But particularly the way you want to look at it in modern music, A sharp and B flat are two different names for the same note. Now, next we have a white key after that. That is the next alphabet letter in the musical alphabet, so that of course is B right there. But look what happens next. Very interesting. No black key in between the next two white keys. Notice this right here. What that means is the next note after that is C. That white key right there is C, and that means there's no sharp and flat note in between B and C. What that also means is that as musical pitches, B and C are not the same distance apart that, say, A and B are. A and B are what's called a whole step apart, and whereas B and C are only half that distance apart. They are what's called a half step apart. A and B are twice as far apart in pitch as B and C are. Now, that brings us to here. Here we are on C. Now, we do have a black key after that. Since it's a little bit higher than C, we often call that note C sharp. But since it's also the next note lower than D, we also call that D flat. C sharp and D flat are two different names for the same note. Now, after that, we have another white key. Of course, that's D right there in our musical alphabet. After that, we have another black key, which is sometimes called D sharp because it's a little bit higher than D. But since it's a little bit higher than E, it's often referred to as E flat. Then we have another white key. That's E right there. But then look what happens again right here. There's two white keys that have no black key in between them. That is E and F. This is the second place in the musical alphabet where there are no sharps and flats in between those two notes right there. E and F are only a half step apart, whereas most of the other notes in the musical alphabet are a whole step apart. Now, after F, we do, of course, have another black key. Sometimes that's called F sharp because it's a little bit higher than F. Other times, because it's the next note lower than G, we refer to it as G flat. Then, of course, we have another white key, and that's G, and we're getting close to the end of our musical alphabet right now. That's G. Then after G, of course, we have one more black key, which is a little bit higher than G, so it's often referred to as G sharp, but other times, since it's the next note lower than A, that we refer to it as A flat. And then finally, here we are, back again, the white key just to the right of center in the group of three black keys. We're back at A again, and we have gone through the entire musical alphabet for one octave. And remember, all of this stuff is going on your guitar fretboard, too. I know you're mostly tuned in here to take guitar lessons, but these concepts are just much easier to see often on a keyboard than they are on the guitar. With the overlapping nature of the tuning of the strings on the guitar, it's a little harder to see how the musical alphabet actually works. And we're going to be looking at that in another one of our posts here, is how you actually play this 12-note so-called chromatic scale actually on the fretboard.